Welcome to Champion Minded, the podcast for those who aim for excellence, not only in the sports arena, but in life. My name is Allistair, author, speaker, mindset and performance coach, and my goal is to help you unleash your unlimited potential and provide you with the tools to achieve greatness. Are you ready to become champion minded? Then let's do this.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast, or welcome back to it. I'm Allistair McCaw. In this episode of the Champion Minded podcast, we're talking youth sports, and my guest today is Darren Wensor. Darren, who's based in Sydney, Australia, is a youth sports coach and a leader in that field, and I thought it would be a great idea to get him to come onto the show because I know there's a lot of sports parents out there and there's a lot of youth sports coaches who could definitely benefit from his message. Now, in this particular podcast or in this episode, we get into a lot of valuable stuff, like I said, for coaches and parents. We talk about what makes a great youth sports coach, what parents should look for in a youth sports coach when choosing one, what constitutes a great sports parent, what should the goals be for coaches working with kids, what are the mistakes youth sports coaches make, much more as well, things like multi-sports, at what age should they specialize, etc. So this was a really interesting and in-depth conversation with Darren, who's got a ton of experience. Also, he has a website, or he has a blog as well, which can be found at www.coachingyoungathletes.com. Again, that is www.coachingyoungathletes.com. So without further ado, guys, let's get into this episode with Darren Wensor on youth sports coaching. Hey, Darren, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast.
Absolutely thrilled, and thanks for the invitation, Allistair.
You're absolutely welcome. Well, Darren, obviously I've been following you on Twitter, and you're someone that's very passionate about youth sports and youth sports coaching. You put a lot of positive stuff out there. First of all, actually, let's start with this because I usually finish with this. But where can people follow you on social media, first of all? Because you know what? I'm an expert at forgetting about this. So Twitter, what's your Twitter handle?
Yeah, it's simply my name, at Darren Wensor. And that's probably one of the best places to find me.
Yeah, well, I'm happy I found you. So I learned a lot from you. I share a lot of your messages as well. So I just want to say keep up the great work. And I know a lot of people are going to definitely benefit from this episode as much as I will. So thank you. Darren, first of all, what makes you so passionate about youth sports and coaching?
You know, youth sports first, Allistair. I think that youth sports is a great place for what UK coaching refer to as kids and young athletes being able to develop the C's of coaching. Now, some of these C's that UK coaching refer to are really important when you think about it. Competence, confidence, connection, character, creativity, caring, and compassion. And when you think about it, these things can be so important to a young person's. So I think that when it comes to involvement in youth sport, that's a really important thing. Now, the thing is, though, these things don't just happen naturally when kids enter youth sports. It's really reliant on quality adult leadership. So I think that's really important.
Okay.
So that's my passion behind, I suppose, coaching. You know, a few years ago when my daughter was 3, she's 5 now, she said, "Dad, what do you do at work?" And I said, "Well, Amelia," I couldn't think of how to explain it. It seems quite complicated. But I said, I like helping people. And that's my role as a coach. I like helping people. And as a coach developer, I like helping other people get better at helping other people. So that's my passion behind youth sports and coaching. And I'd also like to say too that my passion behind coaching goes back to where I read the word coach originates. Apparently it relates to the word carriage, which is, of course, means taking one person from point A to point B, or taking them from where they are to where they want to be. And I think that's just a lovely way to think about coaching.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that coaching is about serving. Coaching is about obviously making other people better. But
No, that's fantastic. Obviously, it shows through that you're passionate about what you do and helping others get further, and so on and so forth. So, anyway, so what traits or qualities should parents be looking for in a youth sports coach? Because this is a question I get a lot. Is Allistair, can you recommend, especially here in Florida, is there anybody you can recommend for my kid, a good youth sports coach? So the question is, what should a parent look for in a youth sports coach? Is there a difference between a youth sports coach and somebody that coaches, adults or 18-year-olds, for example?
Alistair, that was one of the first points I was actually going to make. I think that I would advise parents to look for a youth sports coach who is a development type coach who's a very good teacher. They're not at that stage, I don't think, looking for a performance coach. So I would say someone who thinks of themselves as a teacher, and I think too, certainly at that younger end of youth sports coaching, I think you're looking for an entertainer. I think we're also in the entertainment business. I think I've heard another coach say that. It's interesting, I've got 3 kids under the age of 5, Allistair, and the other day I was watching Peppa Pig. And the episode is called Gym Class, and Pepper and her little classmates go into the gym, and they're met by this passionate, enthusiastic gym teacher who welcomes them to the gym as little explorers on an adventure. He wants them to think of the gym not as a gym but as a jungle, and he takes them through all these gym exercises where he relates them to walking over bridges, over crocodiles, and all those types of things. And I love that. I think a youth sports coach who doesn't take themselves too seriously, who can get down and crouch down cognitively, I call it, with the kids and really see things through their eyes. So I think that's really, really important. But I think a coach like this can see the big picture. They're what I call a big picture coach. So they're not worried too much about immediate results. They really understand their role. I often say that winning, whereas winning can be fun and it can be great, it's not necessarily the sign of a really good sports coach. A youth sports coach, I should say. I'll make that clear, a youth sports coach. I think that a good youth sports coaching program needs to look quite different to what you'll see as a performance program look like, and not just a little bit different, but entirely different, as I probably demonstrated by my reference to Peppa Pig there. So they're some of my thoughts about what parents should be looking for.
No, I love that, absolutely. I mean, I love the fact that call it an entertainment coach, because kids are coming along there. They do want to be entertained. They want to have fun. I remember when I was living back in South Africa many, many years ago, and there was a program that used to come into our gym called Monkey Nastics. And it had 2 instructors that were just fun. They would dress up in outfits. They would dress up in clown outfits. The kids loved it. And they probably the kids didn't even realize that they were doing, exercise and maybe what you'd maybe deem dangerous movements, like with gymnastics and handstands and jumps over pommel horses and so on and so forth. But what I found was that they were distracting the kids with fun elements. And what I find, Darren, especially here living in Florida, where it's a tennis and golf haven, is, kids are getting pushed into programs at 8-9 years old of serious 1-hour footwork sessions and so on and so forth. And I want to get your opinion on this, because my opinion on development and kids is that no kid should specialize in a certain fit, as in tennis fitness or cricket fitness, whatever. It should be generalized before the age of 12, is that they shouldn't go to a cricket-specific coach or a rugby-specific coach or tennis, whatever. It's someone, like you said, who's an entertainer, is growing almost like a love for them, for the sport. Would you agree with that? Or for activity?
Yeah. Look, I think one of the most important things about measuring youth sports success is that the kids want to come back. I think that's one of your key. If you can get the kids wanting to come back, I tell you one of the most favourite things that I've heard from one of the parents that I coached a couple of years ago was that one of the young athletes that I coached, she was 10 or so. Her favourite day of the week was Tuesday, because she got to go to Darren's coaching on that day. So that has to be one of the greatest items of feedback that I've ever I've ever received. But definitely, I agree with that. Avoiding specialisation, even up until 15, 16, and even specialisation within a sport. So my coaching background is and speciality, I suppose, if you call it that, is athletics, is track and field, and even within track and field, we don't want kids to be just sprinters or just long jumpers. From an early age, we want them to be what we call multi-event athletes.
Okay, so Darren, how would you measure youth sports coaching success? What is success in youth sports coaching?
Well, as I said before, I think that is kids developing as life skills. So we really need to, as coaches, think about not just preparing them for the next performance or the next competition or for an end of season tournament. It's about preparing them for their entire athletic life, I see it, and also life beyond sport and athletics. So some of those early, the C's that we talked about before, developing their character, helping them be creative, developing their confidence, connection between people, I think is really, really important when it comes to measuring success, because the goals, as we said before, of kids' sport should be different to performance sport, any type of elite sport. So I think that's where I see success, measuring success in youth sport.
Perfect. Okay, so yes, we have probably a lot of coaches listening to this, a lot of coaches that work with kids and so on and so forth. So what are probably some of the top tips that you'd give youth sports coaches right now?
I'd say smile a lot and don't take yourself too seriously. I think, and again, accept what your role is in learning and development. I mean, we all have, I suppose, ambitions of taking kids to the Olympics or whatever it is, but we really have to understand that's not our main role. I mean, eventually that may happen. It'll be only as we understand, a very, very small percentage of kids. So maybe that's not what we should be focusing on. I mean, I'm very big on all levels of coaching of reflecting. So not just coaching, but also reflecting. So keep some type of reflective diary, whether it be a written diary or an electronic diary, whatever works for you, where you just make notes about what you've done well and what you haven't done well and what you've learned from the kids. I think it's really important because a lot of youth sport coaches are in their early stages of coaching. So I think it's important that we don't expect that we're perfect. And admit that. I know that I'm a better coach than I've coached for 30 years, Allistair, and I'm a better coach now than I was a year ago. So I think that's really, really important. And to help with learning.
Let me ask you, Darren, why do you think you're a better coach than you were a year ago? And I love this conversation because we were just chatting about this before we came on, and about evolving and learning. But why do you think you're a better coach than you were a year ago?
I think I just continue to learn, and I'm open to learning, and I'm open to listening. And even though I think it's really important that we have really strong standards and philosophies and beliefs in our coaching, we also have to be flexible, and I think we also have to be ready to admit when we're wrong or when we could get better, and in that way showing a bit of vulnerability to ourselves and even to other people in asking for help, and continuing to go to education sessions and working with other coaches and listening to other coaches, and I just think coaching makes you a better coach.
Now, you spoke about standards there, and that's something obviously I'm very big on. I mean, in my first book, 7 Keys to Being a Great Coach, my very first chapter is about standards, setting your standards. So let me ask you, obviously standards is very closely linked to discipline, because you're setting your standards of this is what's acceptable, this is not what's acceptable. So within your program, for example, what are some of the standards or that you set, and also discipline? Is it, let me ask you this, is it a coach's job to discipline kids within the group who are maybe being misbehaving and so on, or is that a parent's job? So there's two questions there. Your standards first of all, and then obviously instilling discipline.
Well, look, I would have standards, I suppose. I mean, my background's also teaching. I'm a physical education teacher by trade, I suppose, Allistair. That's my qualification. So I take a few things from there. I mean, I love, kids being on time. I love kids, listening when other people are speaking. I love kids putting in effort. There's just a few of the things that I have as standards. I must admit too, as part of my role, I've taken away teams, representative teams, and I'm really big on uniform. I'm really big on conduct, sportsmanship, of course, that I really like to instill. Now, when there's a couple of ways I go about instilling those standards. Number one, when I coach privately, whenever a parent approaches me about coaching their child, I actually have a handout that I give the parent that outlines the ins and outs of what I do and what my standards are, so that they actually are aware of those before they even come into any program that I'm running, and they also can hopefully speak with those to their child.
So, Darren, could you give us an example of, say, one or two standards that you've set within your program?
Yeah, look, I mean, things like I expect, kids to be on time. I expect people, if they're not going to show, if the child is old enough to actually give me a call themselves. I don't expect an 8-year-old to get on the phone and tell me they're not coming, but I expect people to let me know if they're not going to be there. So there's, I suppose they're starting to learn a little bit about a commitment there.
I just had to chuckle there because, I mean, these days 8-year-olds are probably better than us on a phone, but not talking though, but texting and messages. So, but no, carry on.
Yeah, and look, I do like to have a very much an encouraging, positive environment around my sessions. So there's some of the standards, I suppose, that I do communicate. I mean, the other thing though is when I've taken away representative teams, I've actually given them, the kids who might be 13, 14, 15, the space to help develop their own standards. So, for example, some people might think I'm nuts doing this, but gee, it worked well. I remember a team I took away several years ago, where I sat them down at the start of one of our preparatory camps that we ran before we went on our trip away, and I said to them, right, guys, I want you to work out your curfew time. And people might think, what, you're nuts, and it was important that I gave them some parameters. I didn't just put those questions to them. I said, you want to perform well. You've got to think about other people. We're here not just to have a party. We're here to do well and make each other better. And it was really interesting because those kids all went away. Each of the rooms went away and actually had to work out what their curfew time would be. And they all came up with a very similar curfew time to each other and a very similar curfew time to what I would have set myself. So it just shows that when you pass over responsibility to kids and give them a few parameters, that they can be quite sensible, and of course there'll be more buy-in to those standards when you give them input.
No, I love that because obviously we talk about rules, so it would have been so easy for you as a coach to say, right, the curfew is 10 o'clock, lights out, and everybody goes, okay, well, that's your rules. And we know how kids are, because I was a kid as well, and obviously when lights go out, then you're still not going to sleep. I remember rugby tours and so on. So we were all kids ourselves at one stage. But by the sounds of it, what you're very big on is giving accountability, helping them make choices, not you telling them what to do. And like you just said there, they came back with responsible choices, right? So you gave them standards instead of rules, by the sounds of it.
Yes, and the other thing, Allistair, I suppose that part two to that story is I said to them, right, we are not going to come around and tell you when it's 10 o'clock. You need to have your lights out by 10 o'clock. It's not up to us. And whatever it was, 10 o'clock, 9:30, whatever that curfew was. And when we went around to a room, every single light was off at that time. So it just showed that, it seemed to have worked pretty positively on that occasion.
That's fascinating. So really it really looks like you said, they're just setting their standards and getting a buy-in because they were part of the decision process, right? It wasn't just you saying these are the rules, this is what you have to do. So no, I love that. Excellent stuff. Let's move on to let's move back to multi-sports, because this is something that's a question that comes up all the time. Is how important is it for a kid to play multi-sports? And second question, another double-barrel question. Let's just say you have a kid that's exceptional at a sport. The parent is saying, I think they should specialize. What would your advice be to them? So two questions there. How important is multi-sports? And number two, a kid is excellent at a sport. Let's just say they're at the highest level and the parent wants them to specialize. What advice would you give them?
Firstly, multi-sports, I do see it as very important, developmentally and physically and psychologically. I mean, I love the idea of kids developing a broad base. I think that's hugely important. And look, there is, of course, some evidence that multi-sporting instead of single sporting from an early age helps reduce the chance of overuse injuries. I think it certainly helps prevent boredom and it leaves options open, because we can make the mistake, of course, that we try to talent ID kids too early. And of course, as they grow and develop and other kids grow and develop, they may find that sport that they've put all their energy into at an early age to the exclusion of everything else is not the sport that they may have been for them, I suppose. Once they hit puberty and once they go through all their growth and development. So that's one of my thoughts there, and I also think too, I think it's really worthwhile when you're playing more than one sport. You get time off, of course, from each of the sports. You get to do something else, and if you're not going too well in a sport, if you might be having a bit of a downer or whatever, it's likely that you might be doing well in another sport. So rather than just you're still liking a sport rather than not liking any sport at all, I suppose, if you've only got that one sport that you've got. I tend to advise people that they shouldn't be specialising in a sport till at least 15 or 16 years of age. And of course, it does depend on the sport. We do know there's some earlier specialisation sports. But also too, when the child wants to. I mean, I suppose there does come to a point where they might need some guidance if they're doing too much, and that can be a problem because there's so many sports around these days. I mean, when I was younger, Allistair, I played a winter sport and I played a summer sport, and now of course we have kids going to multiple sports each week, which has some advantages, but kids can become overcommitted, they can become tired, they can under-recover. So I think I'm a huge fan of multi-sporting, but I'm also cautious in overcommitting kids to too many sports at once.
All right, so let me come in there. I'm going to play the devil's advocate because I loved sports in school, and I played 7 sports in school. I mean, I played soccer, rugby, cricket, tennis, track and field, cross country. What else did I do? Anyway, so I played 7 sports, and it was never my parents' choice. It was just I loved playing sports. So, you couldn't pull me off the field. You couldn't pull me off the track or the court, for example. I even remember getting called into the head principal's office once, and it was a lady, and she said to me, "Listen, you can't play 4 sports in the afternoon." And I was like, "Why not?" So I loved it. So if it's I always found it a problem if the parent is pushing the child to do too much, or what if the child really just loves playing sports, like I did, for example.
Yeah, I think in your case, it certainly sounds like it was driven by you, which I think is a huge difference. I think you certainly have to, again, turn it over to the child a little bit, maybe provide some guidance. There's certainly some adult guidance and experience that can come into play there, but I think too, and it depends to what level and to how much commitment the sport is. I mean, if you've got coaches telling you have to be there, Alistair, you have to be there, and we. Yep. I think there's a big difference. So yeah, again, I mean, there's what a healthy pursuit involvement in sport can be. And I think we really need to consider the child's point of view, and if it's child-driven or adult-driven.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I love that. That leads on to the next question, which is perfect. Is how often should athletes be, or like young athletes be practicing? How many hours a week would you suggest? I mean, I've got my opinion on this, but I'd love to hear yours.
Do you know, again, this is really, really interesting because all kids are different, aren't they? So, I mean, I've read an interesting guideline recently where, it's been suggested that as a limiting guideline that a young athlete shouldn't be practicing for a particular sport any more hours per week than their age.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I love these guidelines. I think they're great. But for example, I don't think all 12-year-olds are up to practicing 12 hours a week. Some could be. But I think we have to be a little bit cautious even with guidelines like this, which have been very carefully thought out and have, obviously, and by people who know what they're talking about. But I can't imagine every 12-year-old practicing, what would average on, 6 days a week for 2 hours for a particular sport, because I think that can be misinterpreted a little bit and twisted. Some parents might go, great, that's the guideline, so that's going to be my minimum. I'm going to push it to 12. They're only doing 4 at the moment, but I've been told they can do 12. So there is some problems there. So, but I mean, when it comes to track and field, the Australian Track and Field Coaches Association put out some really interesting guidelines a few years ago, where they said that in that 6 to 8 years of age, those kids can have maybe one, in inverted commas, competition plus one practice per week of about 60 minutes. So, practicing once a week besides having a little race on the weekend. In that 9 to 10 years of age, about the same. And it's not until you move to 11 to 12 years of age that they suggest, and they do say these are broad guidelines. I said we've just spoken about that everybody's different, that they move to practicing twice a week. And even up to 13 to 15 years of age, they're doing track and field specific stuff only, twice a week or so for, around about, only about 3 hours. Now, of course, I think that we can get more sports practice other ways. And, some people might say 3 hours a week, gee, that's not a lot. But you've got to think that these kids, again, are doing other sports, having a run around, if they're younger kids during lunchtime at school. A lot of their free play is very vigorous. So really they are building up hours, not necessarily in sport-specific programs, but in other ways that can be really beneficial also.
No, good points. How can kids get good at sports without burning out? Because read a stat obviously is that 70% of kids drop out of sports before the age of 13 or 14. That's a worldwide stat, and that's worrying to me. Is that why are kids dropping out of sports before the age of 13 or 14?
I think it's really hard to come up with one reason or even a main reason. But I think that some of the things that adults can provide leadership in is, I suspect, and I'm sure there's some research that's shown this, that a lot of the dropouts can be caused by external expectation on kids. Those kids who have shown a little bit of, I suppose, talent early on, and they suddenly have this huge weight on their shoulders that I'm pretty sure in most cases, is a parents, coaches, whatever, trying to do the right thing by the child. But I think that what we often don't realise is that pressure, if we call it that, or that external expectation, can be such a weight on the child that sometimes they just want to get away from whatever is causing that pressure. So I think that is something that we really have to be considerate of when it comes to youth sport.
So let's talk about external pressure, because obviously, like you said, I like that, because here's the thing. Is the kid first started playing the sport because it was fun. So the parents maybe introduced the kid to a sport or a few sports, which I think is a great idea, is give your kid as many sports as possible so they can choose. Not, one of the biggest areas, or one of the biggest mistakes I see is the parent. For example, the father was a soccer player and he wants his kid to play soccer. Uh, he doesn't even give the kid another choice to try tennis or golf or whatever it may be. But important for the kid to choose the sport that they want to go into. Like if I see in commonalities of people like Novak Djokovic and Michael Phelps and Dan Carter and all these great athletes, Usain Bolt, they just loved to go out and practice. They loved to compete. It was self-driven, for example. So, I see it all too often here as well. Like I said, Florida's a hotbed for tennis and golf. So I see many a 12-year-old here that's practicing 6-7 hours a day, which is absurd. Maybe 1 out of 1,000 that are very, very good will make it, but they don't hear about the 999 that didn't make it, for example. So, I echo what you're saying there right now as well. Is just the pressure, the external pressure of the kid shows a little bit of results, and then all of a sudden they're getting shipped off to tournaments, not only in their own state but around the country and eventually around the world, and that pressure just starts to build upon them. They no longer love the sport they're playing. They just find it a job all of a sudden, which is very, very sad. So let's actually move on to parents. I want to ask you this question first of all. Now, like I said, there's going to be a lot of coaches listening to this as well. How do you deal with pushy parents? Now, pushy parents can be, you mentioned that just now as well, Darren, is that every parent wants their best for their kid. You want the best for your kids, and every parent thinks they're doing the right thing. So, you have to be empathetic to that and sympathetic to that, for example. But how would you deal with a pushy parent saying, you need to push my kid harder?
Yeah, I think right up, like I said before, right from the very first approach or first contact that you have with a parent, whether it's a parents meeting or whether it's a one-on-one conversation with a parent, that you let them know number one, your standards and what you're like as a coach, but maybe even beyond that, rather than just stating your standards, it's also nice to give a reason behind why you've got those standards. I mean, if we can sort of get into people's minds that anything that's development can't be rushed. It's certainly you risk giving kids a faulty foundation and missing some very important landmarks when it comes to developing them as young athletes. But it is very enticing. You can be coaching kids and putting them through the fundamentals and doing some very basic stuff, and then there might be a coach across the oval who's doing all this really fancy technical stuff, and of course that's going to look great to the parents, and parents can be fooled by that a little bit, because of course we know when it comes to coaching, we've got to work on those ABCs. You've got to learn to crawl before you can walk, all those things that we say, and if we jump past, I suppose, these fundamentals that are just not seen as really being hugely exciting by the onlooker, and gee, that coach over there is doing all these fancy things, and I think that we just need to ongoing communication, ongoing evidence if you need to do that. I even will share social media with parents that talks about long-term athlete development, and I just think presenting as much evidence and being very calm about it. We don't want to really get in people's faces. We want to just and be telling them how they should be thinking, but we should be just very calm and confident in the information that we're presenting to the parents.
There's a great quote I love, and it goes, hopefully I remember it. It goes, there's a big difference between wanting your kid to be the best and wanting the best for your kid. So, obviously that has a lot to do with, the parents' intentions as well. And, I always say to parents, look, maybe I'm not the right, when I was working in sports performance, now I've moved on to leadership and culture, but when I was working in sports performance, it would be, look, maybe I'm not the right coach for you because, I believe in an athlete being self-driven. Yes, there has to be a bit of a push, there has to be a bit of a shove from parents sometimes from a motivational point of view, but, are your intentions about wanting your kid to be the best or wanting the best for your kid? And, that was something I heavily leaned on as well. So let me ask you this. What should a parent be rewarding their kid on? What other things? Obviously every parent wants their kid to win and do well, but what are the things that a parent should be rewarding their kid on, win or lose?
Yeah, look, I 100%. Now, win or lose, it's very interesting. I once heard someone say that you should treat winning and losing exactly the same in how you respond to a child. So you don't go over the top when they win, and you don't go over the top when they lose in the wrong way. So I think that's very, very important. But I think that when a child comes off the track, off the field, whatever, you reward them, if that's the word we're going to use, but give them positive feedback on their effort, or on their improvement, or on something that they've done well, on their on the temperament that they showed on the day, on their sportsmanship, and then you can relate that back to their performance. So if they're really disappointed with how they've done, you can talk about it through that lens. How was your effort today? Did you do the things that you wanted to do out there? And of course you can then relate a good performance back to that also. And generally it will be effort or how well they've prepared. Depending on their age, and the things that you talk about obviously have to be age specific and age appropriate. And also of course we've also always got to relate it back to fun and enjoyment. And one of the first things I often like to ask kids when they come off the track is did they enjoy it, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's another thing. When is the best time for a parent to go into that conversation? I mean, let's just say the kid comes off the court, they've just lost, they're upset, they're disappointed over the track or whatever it may be. Should a parent go into that conversation straight away, or should they wait until the kid is ready to have that conversation?
Fantastic. That is a great question, because I feel quite strongly about this. I try to always, and hopefully achieve it often, is to let them talk first. Not even try to say something, because regardless of the level, of the athlete, I coach some, reasonably, some national level type track and field athletes, and have over the years, and even when I haven't been able to go to the competition with them, and I see them at training the next week, I won't even mention it when they get out of the car and walk over to me. I'll let them say something. I might just even say, it sounds ridiculous, but they've just come back from a national championships, and they'll get out of the car, they'll walk over to me, and I won't just say, how'd you go? Because I think that's maybe, I don't know, it's presenting something that I don't feel quite comfortable with, that I'm so, big on how they've gone. I'll just might say, how was your week, or how was school? And then I give them the space to then start talking to me about what happened at the championships that they might have just been to, or the event that they've just done. I mean, it's funny, even when my young kids, I told you I've got 3 kids under 5 get home from swimming lessons, I'm dying to find out. Obviously, I'm dying to find out how the athletes have gone, or how my kids have gone at swimming lessons, but I let them tell me. I just say, how's your day? How was your day today? And if they want to mention it to me, they will. If they see it as a highlight, they will let me know, but often it might be the third or fourth thing that they tell me about, and I just have to be patient and wait, Allistair, before they talk to me about it. So I just think, we again, it allows the child, the young person, to take control of the situation and the conversation, and they'll tell you when they're good and ready, I would say.
That's great advice, because when I used to work with young athletes and parents, I always said the worst 3 words a parent can say to a kid after a competition is, "Did you win?" And I always found those, I always said to parents, because part of a youth sports coach's job is to educate the parents, okay? Because who's going to do it? So, I know this is something that you're big on as well, is that when you're working with a kid, you're not just working with the kid, you're working with the family. You're educating the parents, because that kid might be with you for, say, 3 lessons a week, which is, say, 3 hours, which is actually quite a lot. okay, from a coaching point of view. So the rest of the time they're with their parents, the other 161 hours of the week or whatever it may be. So it's important for us as coaches to educate the parents as into what to say or what not to say in the car ride home. And you know what? That's a great point right now, because you brought up the car ride home about 2 minutes ago. Now, there was a survey done in the United States with college athletes of what was the worst memory for you from youth sports, from being, a junior athlete. And the number one was the car ride home, because you were boxed in, and dad or mom are talking about the match and why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that and why did you make that decision and so on and so forth. What's your opinion about the car ride home, Darren?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've spoken about that to parents before, and it's something often that they haven't thought about, because they're all just trying to be helpful, of course. And sometimes, look, they can be a little bit emotional. Parents too. They obviously, they ride obviously all the highs and lows with their kids, but I think the car ride home is a time where you're boxed in, but you've got to give the kids space, if that makes sense. You've got to, again, that
should
talk
you
about
even,
something.
as a parent, should you even be talking about it?
Only if the child brings it up, I would say. I would leave it till the child brings it up, and it certainly shouldn't be the first thing that you talk about. I mean, yeah, I just think it's interesting, because when you bring this to attention to parents, when you tell them a story, and again, I've heard that same sort of study that you just talked about the car ride home. When you bring that up, a lot of parents smile knowingly and nod their head and say, I've been that parent, and I think just bringing that to the attention of parents, it can change things enormously to how they treat that car ride home, for sure.
No, good advice. All right, another question that you'd have by parents is, let's just say the child is going through a slump. They're not performing well. They're putting in the practice. They're all these things. How would you help, or how would you respond to a young athlete's slump in performance, for example?
Yeah, look, it's interesting, because when a child is not performing as well as they would like to, or as a coach was hoping or whatever, it's instinctive. It seems the right thing to do, that you just knuckle down and you train harder and you refocus and all these things, where I often think that it's the opposite thing that you need to do in that situation, because you really have got to look at where this drop in performance might be stemming from. So if the child, for example, if it's fatigue, well, training hard is not going to help with the fatigue, is it? If it's mental or psychological fatigue, doing more practice. If it's overthinking, then trying to focus more is not going to help. If the child's got a little bit of an injury that they're not telling you about, training hard is not going to help. If a child's growing, or going through those stages where they're, getting a bit awkward, well, training hard is not going to help. So my first thought when it comes to a child being in a slump is to maybe back off a little bit, or change things a little bit, or refresh things a little bit, and certainly keep those communication lines open. And look, and again, certainly if the child's performance is dropping because they're just losing interest, and asking them to refocus more and commit more is not going to possibly be beneficial also. So I think that first instinct is to, let's train harder, let's put more sessions on, we've got to work harder. But that could be the worst response to a child who's in that slump.
So that actually leads me to the next question. How do we encourage young athletes to try difficult tasks and persevere? Especially if a kid is saying, I can't do this, maybe they're low in confidence. How can a youth sports coach help an athlete to, to embrace the difficult things?
Yeah, look, I think that there's a few things, and gee, I've had some interesting experiences with this personally with my own kids recently, with learning how to ride bikes and things like that, Allistair. I think a child, you need to give them the space to make it child driven. And allow them a bit of autonomy so that they're making the decision. So it's interesting, I remember a couple of years ago that my little daughter was, practicing on a balance bike, and she found it very difficult, and she shied away from doing it because she found it difficult. And then one day we're down at the local park, and she's riding along on a little balance bike, and she says, "Oh, Dad, I'm going to ride down that hill, on the balance bike. There's this sort of fairly gentle but long sort of grassy slope that she wanted to ride down." And I was frankly nervous because I thought she's never done anything like it before. She's never ridden that far that fast, but off she went, and she rode straight to the bottom. And I look back on that, and I'm thinking, and it surprised me. It was her idea. It was at a level that she thought that she could do. It was fairly safe, it was a gentle grass slope, so there wasn't any trees or potholes or obstacles. It was a game to her, riding to the bottom and trying to balance all the way to the bottom, and it wasn't pushed by me at all. There was no expectation on her. It was her idea. There was no technical advice from me. It was just completely led by her. So I think if we can create circumstances when it's actually the child has belief that they're in control of the level of difficulty and the activity, I think that's when they're going to be more likely to actually have a go at things.
Excellent. Let me ask you this, Darren, and we're just, obviously I don't want to take too much of your time. I know it's morning there in Australia. You've got a full day ahead of you, but what would you say that the top 3 things are to being a great youth coach? I know there could be many that you could list.
Yes.
Here, but what are 3 things that if you were watching a coach going, okay, that's a good youth coach?
Yeah, look, I think again, it's a youth coach who doesn't take themselves too seriously and is actually really, really prepared to have lots of fun with the kids.
You got to love kids, right?
Do you can really stand back and see that. It's something that looking on, you can see that coach is smiling, they're laughing, they're not taking themselves too seriously.
They're almost like being a big kid, right?
Almost like being I agree. And again, all coaches are going to be different. We're not all not all youth coaches or any coaches are going to be exactly the same. But I think that is one thing. I think another thing is being prepared to allow the kids to take some control within the session and make decisions. You ask them, even if it's do you want to use the red ball or the yellow ball? You give them little things like that. So being prepared to relinquish some control, if that's the best word, and let the kids go. And you'll often be completely surprised at what they come up with. One thing I love doing is just providing some equipment. Say, kids, make an obstacle course. And they do it, and they'll often make a more difficult and interesting obstacle course than you ever could.
Yep.
And then I might say to them, right, choose a way to make it through the obstacle course, and you'll have kids, crawling. You'll have kids, I clearly remember one day I got the kids to do this, and one of the little girls who was also in gymnastics got into a bridge position, a tummy up bridge position, hands and feet on the ground, and walk through on her hands and feet. I'm going, oh my goodness, I would never ask a kid to do that, but she did it, So they'll often surprise you in that way, and I think being prepared to to learn from the kids. So I think it's really important that at the end of a session, you ask the kids, what did you enjoy most? And a really
Feedback.
and it'll often surprise you, Allistair. You probably know this. I remember a little while back. I set up this fantastic session. I was really proud of it. I thought it was a great session. I'd planned it intricately. I put some great warm-up activities in there. The kids seemed to love it. And when I asked the kids at the end of the session, two of the kids, what did you like best? Two of the kids said, "Oh, we liked when you allowed us to help you tidy up and stack the cones in their colours." And that
Yeah.
And here's me thinking, they would have said this game or that game that I'd carefully planned, But I thought, wow, so what do I do next session?
I can relate. I can relate because that was my methodology as well when I used to work with youth sports, was afterwards always get feedback and see what did the kid learn today, because it was fascinating. So here's the thing, I was very methodical. I'd plan a session and so on. Okay, this is the things we're going to do and so on and so forth. And I'd be super impressed that we were going to do this certain skill or drill or whatever it may be. And then, like you just said there now, at the end, you'd say, right, what did we learn today, kids? And it would be something about a game you played. Kids love games. Kids love games. They love challenges. They love games. They're not into the drills and lining up and so on and so forth. Well, some are. I mean, I'm just generally talking. But it's amazing what they come back with when you say, what did you enjoy or what did you learn today? And I think that's crucial, just like you said there now, is get feedback. Because it's not about you, right? It's about having that kid wanting to come back to see you and to have fun again.
Yeah, and do you know, Allistair, what can be a very confronting question too to ask if you're confident enough to do it is, what didn't you like about the session? That can be a real interesting one. But if be prepared to ask it, because you can learn some great things, and even asking them things like, is there something you would like to do more of? Is there something we didn't do today that you would like to do next time? And I even started in the last little bit too, asking kids at the start of the session, is there anything you particularly would like to do today, and be really prepared to quickly pivot, throw something extra into the session to try and I suppose deliver that to the kids, because you're there for them. That's the thing that we really got to understand.
That's what I'm getting out of this conversation, and I'm so glad you came onto the podcast, because there's a lot of youth sports coaches out there, a lot of good ones and so on and so forth, but I know this is your passion. I've followed you for years, and you obviously walk the talk as well. But the bottom line is, we want them to come back. We want them to be like, I can't wait to come back and see Darren. I can't wait to come back and see Michelle or whoever it may be. That's what it's about. It's about attracting them back, because like I said earlier on this episode, is that more than 70% of kids are dropping out of sports at the age of 13 and 14, and that's worrying. But the bottom line is, from what I'm hearing from you, is that the goal is that they can't wait to come back to the next session. Would you agree?
Yeah. Really looking forward to the session, and seeing it as I said before, it's a highlight of their week. I think that's really important, that they really want to get involved. They're almost pestering mum and or dad, to get them to the car, to get down to that practice session.
I mean, almost like I said, I don't want to take too much of your time here, but a question I missed out on, and I want to ask you quickly, is how important is communication between the coach and the parent? How often should that be?
Do you know, it's interesting. Parents should be seen as partners. You often hear, and I don't know if it's a conscious thing that people do or intentional, that people are often talking about, how am I going to deal with the parents? How am I going to deal with them? And I think no, you're not dealing with parents. You're actually working with them. I think that's a really, really important thing, that they're a partner. You talked before also that kids spend the major part obviously of their lives with their parents, and they've got a huge influence. So a lot of good work by a coach can be quickly undone if it's not supported by the parents. So I think having parents at sessions, I think greeting parents when they get there, taking the time if you can to chat with parents following a session, explaining to parents what you're doing if they're on the sidelines. Even very. Look, I'm a coach. I mean, like, most coaches. I mean, we don't want parents to interfere with the coaching during a session, and making sure that you in a very clear but in a very nice way tell them why that can be detrimental to the athlete coach relationship.
Is that a conversation? Is that a conversation you have with the parents before you start working with the kid at the very beginning?
I certainly try to. I like to, and it's interesting because you want to be very careful that you don't offend a parent or anything like that, because some are just so enthusiastic and they want to be helpful. But I think if you approach it in a way where you're saying, look, conflicting messages can certainly I suppose not be helpful, and that you really want them just to be there as a support. Great. If they're there and they're learning and they're you may be able to get them to help out in some way. But overall, I think obviously once the kids come out to the session, it is that coach that is in charge, and both the parents and the athletes have to understand that. But we also have to make the parents feel very, very much part of the process.
Excellent advice. Darren, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I mean, I learned so much from you as well. I know that a lot of parents, coaches are going to learn a lot from this as well. Again, best place for them to follow you is on Twitter, as you said, Darren Wensor. Pretty simple Twitter handle. Are there any other resources out there or anything that you shared as well, or is Twitter your main portal for that?
I do have a blog that I write, Allistair, called coachingyoungathletes.com.
Okay.
And that, it does lean towards track and field, but there's also a lot of very general coaching articles in there. Yeah, that's 100% relatable, and a lot of the articles in there don't even mention track and field. But certainly, if you're an athletics or a track and field coach, I'm sure you'll be able to find something in there. But certainly, I think most coaches could find some bits and pieces in there that they would find useful.
Perfect. The name of that website was again?
coachingyoungathletes.com.
Awesome stuff. Darren, thanks so much for your time. I know it's around about 10 o'clock in the morning there you're in Sydney, right?
I'm in Sydney, correct.
Awesome, yeah. And it's 8 p.m. here in Florida. So I wish you a good morning. Thanks so much again, and we speak soon.
Allistair, thank you. It is an absolute pleasure.
So there you have it, guys. A massive thanks to Darren for coming on to the show. Remember, this podcast is available on iTunes, YouTube, on Amazon Podcasts, and of course via my website, allistairmccaw.com. Connect with me on social media, on Twitter at Allistair McCaw, on Facebook, Allistair McCaw page, and on Instagram, Be Champion Minded. So remember, you were made for greatness. Now go do the work. Stay champion minded.